Hi, it's Dennis Daly. We all go through troubles and trials. Some of us fail, but others pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and start all over again. In a way, that's the story of my guest this time around. Mary Manin Morrissey joins us. She is a wonderfully complicated woman who has done so much. At 16, she was a homecoming princess who dreamed of college, and then she found herself with child, as it were, ostracized by her own school. A year later, she thought she was going to die, and she didn't. And she has a wonderful story to tell and a great new book, Mary, called Building Your Field of Dreams. Welcome to this week's American Montage. Welcome to our studios here in Washington. Let me lead off by asking this. A lot of radio people will not talk about religion, will not talk about ethics. If it is discussed, if they are discussed on radio, sometimes they're in an extremely left-wing or right-wing format. Why do we shy away from religion? I mean, I'm never afraid on this program to talk about it, and the fact I went to Catholic schools and my background. Why do we think that whenever you talk about religion, you're getting into dangerous territory?
Well, I think part of it is that we've lost our focus on what it is that makes life really matter. We've gotten lost in so much of what we're talking about is what's wrong rather than what could be better. We've talked about how to acquire more things versus where we find real peace.
Of course, there's also that criticism that we in the media get about only reporting the bad things, too.
Gets attention.
So maybe it's self-fulfilling in that way. Let's go back to the beginning. In the fly of your book, it talks about how your life started out. Can you take us through that evolution from the time when you were the perfect high school student, and then things went wrong and things went right, and you got to where you are today? We've got an hour. It's all yours.
Thank you. I grew up in a suburb of Portland, Oregon, and I had a high school experience like most young girls dream about. I was class vice president on the drill team, the dance squad, and had that coveted title, high school homecoming princess. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of my junior year in high school, I was pregnant. It was in 1966, Beaverton, Oregon. This was a very highly shaming experience. My high school boyfriend and I decided we would get married, and I told a trusted teacher at the end of my junior year what was happening. And the next thing I knew, the principal of the high school called me in and said, Mary, you've done well in high school. We're happy for that. We understand what's happening now in your life, and we want you to know we wish you well, but it would be inappropriate for you to return to this high school next year to complete your high school education because we can't have a pregnant girl being mixed in with the normal girls. Normal.
I love that.
And so, but there's a place for people like you. It's across the river in the inner city, not during the day, at night after dark, with the pregnant girls and the delinquent boys, and that's where you could complete your high school education.
So you were told right away at that wonderfully impressionable stage in your life that what you had done was not only wrong, it was abnormal, and you had to go leave the demographic you grew up in.
And potentially contagious.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And go. So, well, for example, when I was in high school in Indiana, I remember a case where a married boy could not take phys ed in high school. The rationale was he might give away some secrets in the locker room or something, Society changes. How did that affect you, and what did your parents say? Did you have any recourse to fight back, or did you just play the good soldier and say, well, that's the rule, okay, thank you?
No, that's how we played it. That was the rule, and of course my parents were so shame-filled anyway. I had shamed them, I'd shamed my school. They mourned for me as if I had died. All the dreams that we thought were going to be happening in my life now seemed circumvented. So I went to that high school the next year. In fact, I tell the story that when I registered the first night, and I was frightened. It was a part of the city I'd never been in. One of the guys said, well, my name is Paul, but I'm no apostle. And the other guy said, yeah, my name is Peter, and I'm no saint. And I said, well, my name is Mary, no comment. But it was a very shame-filled year. I spent the year hating myself. My son was born in December. I did graduate. But by the next summer, in July, I was in an intensive care ward in a Portland hospital being told that I had fatal kidney disease. One kidney was totally destroyed, and the toxic condition called nephritis was active in the other kidney with 50% destruction.
But you're here right now.
I am here right now.
How did that happen?
Well, fortunately for me, a minister came to visit me, and I remember laying in that bed thinking, how did I get here? I mean, a year ago my life was heading in one direction, and now here I am being told maybe I'm not going to live. And fortunately for me, a minister came to visit me, and she began to talk to me about miracles not just being something that happened 2,000 years ago, and that miracles are ordinary occurrences that can happen when we touch and connect to a higher power.
I will tell you a story of something that happened to me. Many of my listeners know that 3 winters ago I shattered my left leg. Was going down a little hill behind an apartment building, and I call it the $20,000 shortcut.
Oh.
And it's one of the reasons I wanted to move to Los Angeles finally, is to get out of the bad weather. But I'm lying in a pool of ice water behind a building in an area where nobody can see me, going into shock. Because I'm the kind of person who normally never wore a coat, really. I would just walk to the subway quickly and never thought about what happens if I get trapped outside. So I'm lying there with this terribly mangled ankle, and I started praying, and I look up, and there's a high school boy named Scott who says, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I haven't had a heart attack, I haven't been shot, I've broken my leg. Would you go to the Chinese restaurant across the street and call an ambulance?" He comes back, and he says to me, "Do you want me to hold your hand?" And the touch of someone, the contact at that point, the ambulance comes, I look up, and he's gone. Now, I don't particularly believe in guardian angels, maybe, but it really made me think. And the fact that contact, that laying on of hands, if you will, even by what we would have to classify, I guess, as a layperson, but just the contact of a fellow human being, it was as if I was warmed by that experience. I'd never had that before. Yeah. But it's, I remember talking to a doctor one time to carry through what you had said. He said, "I'm not sure that I believe in the power of prayer, but I know that if someone doesn't have the will to live, I can't keep them alive."
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, for me, when the minister spoke to me, she spoke to me about a possibility of total healing, and that she said, "Can you believe that it's possible that in the morning it won't be required that you have a kidney removed?"
And you were how old?
I was 18 years old. And when she asked me if I could believe it was possible I wouldn't have to have the kidney removed, I gave her a truthful answer, and the answer was no, I don't believe that. I'm in too much pain. And she said, well, she talked to me about the condition of my mind during the last year and the shame I'd been feeling, how much I'd been hating myself, which is a toxic thought condition. And so she suggested to me that perhaps it would be possible to take all of what was toxic emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and place it in that one kidney that was going to be removed. And could I believe that could remove the difficulty from me? Could it happen that way? And while I didn't believe it was probable, I thought, well, maybe it's possible. And sometimes that's all it takes. You were laying there and you had a prayer. You sent a thought in a different direction. The next thing you see is someone who can help you. Now, all of the different choices Scott was making that morning so that he would show up at that exact moment, at that exact time. There's a divine timing to our life, and there's so much more happening than we have any awareness of.
How did that minister walk into your life? Was she just making the rounds? Had you asked for a friend of the family?
A friend of the family heard about this person, and I asked her to come pray with me. And when she prayed with me, it was more than just saying words. She was really helping me form a new way of thinking about myself and my life. And so she helped me form that thought. And even though I didn't believe it was probable, I thought it was possible, perhaps. She did a prayer. My hair on my arm didn't stand up. I didn't hear bells ring. But I relaxed. And I slept that night for the first night in many weeks. And the next morning when they did the surgery, the one kidney was, in fact, totally destroyed. The other kidney, they came out and they said to my gathered family, they don't know why, when they looked at it, it should have looked a certain way given the tests. Looked pretty good. They didn't know why, but time would tell. And that was 30 years ago.
Time has told.
Time has told.
After all this time. Did you at the time think in terms of wanting instant results? I mean, I sometimes think that in this quick fast food, I don't have time to do anything society, we have gotten away from the acceptance of prayer that our fathers and grandfathers, I'm saying that generically, and grandmothers had, because I think life was slower, and so our deadline for God doing what we wanted was farther down the road. Is it tougher to acclimate people to prayer now that they want instant gratification more than they did before?
I think it's a misunderstanding in an educational process that there are growing seasons to phases of our life, just like there are growing seasons to crops, and that we live in a vending machine society where we do want immediate response. And if we don't get immediate response, rather than trusting that it takes time for an acorn to become an oak tree, and that it is the natural organic process for that to occur, that there's something happening in us that isn't always seen but can be felt. And so the power and the presence of a creator, even in the midst of what looks like waiting, we can still feel the grace. We can still feel the comfort. Even though you were laying in ice-cold water, you began to feel a warmth. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a physical warmth. It was a warmth that overtook what physically you were going through. And the same thing can happen. We can be in the midst of a chaos. That chaos can be all around us, but it doesn't have to be in us.
I know I'm going off in 1,000 directions, but you said something there that triggered a thought. We were talking about touching, feeling warm. There's a favorite movie of mine, largely because it was filmed in Indiana, called Breaking Away. And it's about the 4 high school boys in Bloomington, Indiana, who really don't know what they're doing. And there's this great separation between the academic oasis of Indiana University and this very blue-collar city. Well, Dennis Christopher plays the boy who the movie focuses on, and in one scene he breaks down in tears and flies into his father's arms. His father's played by Paul Dooley, and you see his dad reaching his arms around his son, not sure how to hold on to him. Because it's been 15, 20, well, not 20, but 15 years since the boy was an infant. Do you see a lot of children who just don't get that physical reinforcement from their parents anymore? I mean, I'm lucky. I grew up in a very touchy-feely, embracing kind of family, but it just occurred to me that in dealing with families, you must see a lot of really cold isolation people feel now. Mm-hmm. It's just not an in thing to go up and throw your arms around somebody.
No, we've been trained away from that. But, I really believe in a resurgence of people recognizing, just as you're speaking about it today, that there is a resurgence that is growing, of people realizing that we're not going to find peace of mind, we're not going to find what really matters most in life in just getting more things. That there is a huge shift that we will see in the next 10 years in America of a return to what we might call simple abundance, the smell of good coffee, the touch of our child's hand, the noticing sunrises and sunsets.
Your book, when you look at it, Building Your Field of Dreams, immediately has that baseball connotation from the movie Field of Dreams. Did you do that on purpose? Did it just feel good? Is there something that relates to a game plan in there we should know about?
Well, there is a strategy to this, and that part of the foundation of it is that you're going to build a life. Every one of us is going to build a life. It can be a life that is desperate, a life that is disparate of our dreams, or it can be a life that really is one after another a fulfilling experience. Every one of us has a gift this year, 525,600 minutes, and you and I choose how we're going to invest those minutes. And when I share that with people, I've had 25 years working in the laboratory called Life with thousands of people, and they go, oh, gee, I put 20,000 in a resentment this year. I may not want to bear the kind of interest that kind of an account will bear in my life. And then begin to look at how we're investing each minute. And if we can't get a hold of a dream in our mind, we can't possibly bring it about in our lives.
One of the things you notice as you get older, too, and I have that terrible 50 birthday coming up, you need to talk to me about this, it's just driving me crazy, is that the minutes go by more quickly.
I think it's our focus that changes.
You think so?
Yeah, our focus changes. And the wonderful thing about 50, there are a million of us
You've been there?
No, I haven't been there
yet,
but I know a million of my friends. There are a million people who turned 50 this year in America. So you're not alone.
I thought I was the only one turning 50.
Is that in terms of time slowing down a bit, is that you get to notice what really matters to you most. You get to notice what it is that is of core essence in your life. And feed that instead of trying to get somewhere, because you find that the somewhere you're trying to get really is right here.
Let's move forward. How did you get into the ministry?
I got into the ministry because not only did I pay attention to what had happened in my life when I experienced a quote-unquote miracle, that was a physical miracle. And certainly when you study the teachings of Jesus, you learn that not all the miracles stuck. People went back to their old way of being and their old way of thinking, and so before long they were in need of another miracle from me. I began to practice a new way of living and to practice a new way of thinking, and I did not return to the toxic thinking that brought about that condition. But it caught my attention that if you change a thought, your life can change. That's simple, and it's in every one of the world's wisdom teachings, that as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And I began to pay attention to the kinds of thinking that we get into and how to help people. So I wanted to teach kids at first, so I got an undergraduate degree in education, got a graduate degree in psychology, and went on and became an ordained minister so that I could have a framework for helping people look at, we're co-creators. We are creative beings. The universe gives us birth as a creative being, and we are going to create a life. What kind of life that is really in our hands. It's a very precious experience. Most of us just think life is happening to us. And so we kind of deal with what comes up rather than realizing life is proceeding from us and through us.
You know, one of the words kids like to use is bogus nowadays. Do you find that a person such as yourself, who is a positive thinker, gets looked, how grammatical this is, but is looked at askance by a lot of people who say, you know, you can't be that happy. What are you high on anyway? I mean, I know, like a lot of people, I'm very complex. I have a very moody side. I was extremely depressed in my 20s, almost manic depressive in my late 20s, had a nervous breakdown. And I remember the psychologist at the time saying something very interesting. He said, "Is this the worst day of your life?" I said, "Well, I think it's the worst day of my life." He said, "Well, that's good." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because tomorrow can't be that bad."
Oh, that's a great thought.
You know, and that stuck with me since I was 26. But I, you know, I'm one of those class clown people. People are always saying, "Why are you so happy?" And I just wonder, from your standpoint, because you have such a positive attitude about things, aren't people skeptical of that? This woman must be on drugs.
Well, people have been skeptical, but as they begin, you give them just a few principles, such as thoughts held in mind reproduce after their kind, that within every thought is the seed of its future fulfillment, just as within a corn seed is the possibility of a corn stalk that will bear more fruit of the corn. And so every thought is a seed. And that the man who gave you that thought, who said, "Is this the worst day of your life?" That thought, because you held it in mind, reproduced that if I've had the worst day, it can only be up from here. And so it began to produce a result in your life. And what I find is if people will give, looking at their thoughts and holding thoughts that are the seeds of how they want to experience life, just half a chance, they don't have to believe me. They believe the results they get in their own lives.
You know, it's funny how phrases like that stick in your mind. I had a professor at Indiana University who said something one day, casually in class, that really here 30 years later with the Simpson trial and the John Benet Ramsey thing really bears fruit. He said, "Remember when you write that journalism is not gossip with a dateline." And it didn't mean anything back then, but it's really come back to haunt me. Like, journalism is not gossip with a dateline. You know, and just little, I guess, as you say, little acorns, little gems of thought. It always amazed me how people who are in the ministry are able to convey thoughts to people when, if you look in the New Testament, sometimes the apostles didn't hear a darn thing Jesus said. You know, my favorite story is the one, was it Peter and Paul are out walking, the withered fig tree story, and Jesus says, I'm not going to be around forever, you know, you're going to have to take on this ministry by yourself, and then they don't seem to listen, and he looks at the fig tree and he says, this thing's going to die. Well, they come back about 20 minutes later and it's dead. And one of the apostles said, the tree's dead. And Jesus says, I said it was going to die. And the apostle says, yeah, but what does that have to do with anything? You know,
Yeah, that's right.
You sit there going, what is wrong with these people? They sat around the campfire with him, and they still didn't understand what he said. What are the, and I don't want to avoid the book here, but what are the best and worst things about ministry? What do you find are the most fulfilling things, and what are the most frustrating things in dealing ethically and religiously with people?
I think one of the most fulfilling things that can happen is when you really see and have the experience of someone having their lives transform, that they begin their spiritual walk, and then they have a direct experience of the presence and the power that we call God, known by many names, and they begin to have a walking personal relationship in such a way that they really report the fruit of their life as more health, more happiness, more prosperity, a feeling of meaning and purpose. And one of the most frustrating parts is when you know that there are principles and practices that produce that feeling, and people stay stuck. They say they want the experience, but they're not willing to do their part.
You are heard in about 100 countries.
Yes.
And your flock numbers in excess of 3,000.
They're in Oregon.
What kind of feedback do you get from outside? What kind of letters do you get from people who are listening abroad? They have the same problems we have?
They have the same problems, different kinds of frameworks for them. But you know what people say is, oh, now I finally understand. Now I finally understand what Jesus was saying, or I'm beginning to put it together in a way that it's real in my life, and I'm beginning to see that something can be different for me, that I don't have to wait for something to happen to me. I can participate in the evolution of my own life. It's a very empowering and freeing experience.
I don't want to get into dogma here, but I want a sense of direction on something.
Okay.
We live in a very, very complicated society. I grew up, as I said, going through Catholic schools, living in a town that was about half and half Catholic and Protestant, but I remember being beaten up once when I was a kid because I was a Catholic, and all the kids I knew were Protestants. So you have to have the conflict somewhere. But here in Los Angeles, for example, there's a large Asian community. There are so many people in the Christian community who like to refer to other people as heathens, yet we all have to live together. How do you reconcile that, and what advice do you give to people who adhere very strongly and even fundamentally to the Bible, but yet have to live in a society where a great number of people are non-believers?
Well, there's a difference between religiosity and spirituality. You know, our religion is the path that we take to come to God. But spirituality is that every one of us is part of the one spirit. We're part of the family of humanity. And that I cannot believe in a God who plays favorites. I don't believe that before Jesus came, the Jews that didn't know Jesus were condemned, nor the Buddhists, nor the Hindus. I believe in a God who gives life to all of us and has a path for all of us to follow. And so when we find that there are those who practice a particular path who feel like they can be the only ones right, those of us who have more tolerance just need to honor and support them in their own path and not take it personally that they might feel our path is not appropriate.
You like to mention biblical characters in the book Building Your Field of Dreams. Not everybody reads the Bible a lot. I know when I started intermingling with what we called non-Catholics, I felt very deficient because they were always pulling rank on me. Well, don't you know in Ecclesiastic, or there's that great cartoon about the two ancient men sitting out in front of a tent, and one's reading a scroll, and the other said, it reads real good, but couldn't you think of a catchier title than Deuteronomy? But how important is that for you to use Samson and Delilah and some of the characters from the Bible in explaining things to people? Kind of a new parable in a way. Is it because people can hang their hat on that? They're familiar with it?
Well, I know that I remember stories. I learn through stories, and many of us can remember stories from our childhood. But what I like to do is help us understand that every character in the Bible is really a part of us. We have parts of those people in us as well, and to understand what are the Delilahs in my life today? What is it I'm tempted to give up the power that's really in me to follow my path for something that might look tempting but actually would take me away from what I'm about?
Mary, I guess I've dwelled on a couple of topics too much here, but one of the really bad things about being in the news business is you see so much domestic violence anymore. I mean, you really wonder if there is any thread of American family left in this country.
Well, as a nation, we were all talking just a few weeks ago about the young kids, the teenage kids who gave birth to a baby and put it in a dumpster.
Yeah.
And what struck me in that story was that those parents of those kids did not know when she was 6 months pregnant went off to college. Somehow they were shocked in November.
Where were they?
Well, that's the question I have.
It's hard to hide 6 months.
And what would happen that a daughter couldn't go to her parents? What sort of dynamic was existent in a family where they're raised in a $700,000 house, they're part of the country clubs, and yet she couldn't speak to her parents? As shameful as it was for me to be pregnant in 1966, I knew that I could go to my parents, and I didn't have to find it out then. I knew all along the way because we talked and we talked and we talked. And I think the message there is not to assume that your kids will come to you. Go to your kids first. Talk to them first and say, I want you to know, I'm not always perfect, and it always hasn't been easy for you to talk to me, but I want you to know something. If you're ever really in a jam, I'm here for you.
My mother consistently always said, don't be afraid to tell me anything.
That's right.
Now, there are some things I didn't tell her. Some things I still haven't told her. But by and large, I never really feared that I was going to get smacked or thrown up against the wall or that kind of thing. Is it our generation then that dropped the ball on this? That we've gone from Ozzie and Harriet to Def Leppard? Or I mean, what has happened here?
Well, we're one of the first generations that has had the economic choice. We weren't so caught with survival. Our parents were just they had to deal with the depression. They had to deal with putting food on the table and a roof on a head. That takes a lot of energy. We've had an economic freedom to get into our feelings and say, what do I feel like? Some of that's been good and some of that's been conceited and self-focused, where we get so caught in how we feel about a moment, we forget to draw from the depths to build the life that really has meaning.
How tough is it to have a congregation, have to pay the light bill, have to pay the mortgage, but don't always want to seem as if you have your hand out? I think that would be one of the toughest things, regardless of religion, to try to get away from, the poor will always be with us, the whole real angst that early Christianity had against wealth. It's easier for a rich man to go through the eye of a needle or camel than a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. But yet, people can't bring you sheep anymore to pay the light bill. Is that tough?
It's an education process. It's just, it can be tough, or it can just be, I see it as an education process, that as we practice a spiritual way of living, as we practice a life, whether it's giving to our child or giving to our neighbor or supporting a church, that as we grow spiritually, you want to support something that helps others. Our church adopted a Habitat for Humanity house this year. It's just one of a myriad of different ways that we reach out in the community, and that is the outpouring of a connection with God. You know that you're connected to an abundant universe, and that the outpouring of that is the result of knowing that experience.
Mary, let me conclude here by asking, how do you build your field of dreams? How do you start? Where do you go? Pacing yourself? What do you advise people?
I'd advise people one thing first, and that's, what is your dream? Dreams speak to you through two ways. Our dreams speak to us through our longings, that which we really are longing to experience, and the other way our dreams speak to us is through our discontent, when we're feeling kind of hemmed in and deadened and not so alive, because as we're building our dreams, we feel more and more alive. So you can test your dream this way, because you're going to spend the 525,600 minutes this year, and if you're going to invest them in your dream, you want it to be a dream that gives you life, a dream that you'll need to grow in, because life is about growth, a dream that you will need to partner with your higher power, a dream that fits your core values, and a dream that somehow will be good for others. Somehow you'll bring some good into the world through your dream. And if you can answer yes to those questions, and it's worthy of your life energy, even if that particular dream doesn't come about, it will lead you on a path to something that may even be better.
I have heard that most people do not keep their New Year's resolutions because they bite off too much.
And in fact, more weight is gained in February than any other month of the year.
Rebound,
That's
ricochet?
Right, because we tried to do it under self-will. We say, I'm not going to eat, I'm going to lose weight, and so for that month we just, grind it out. But we need to touch a power that's greater than our own in order to do things that we can't do on our own. And that's really what building your field of dreams is about. It's about partnering with the presence and the power that gives you life, taking one step at a time. There's a phrase I use called going to the edge of the light you see. We were quoting scripture earlier. There's a scripture that says, the Lord is a lamp unto my feet. A foot lamp only shows you the next step. But you have to take that step before the foot lamp can show you the next step. Most of us want to see a mile down the road before we're willing to take a step. So if you take the step that you can see, say a mom wants to get an education. She's got little kids. She doesn't know how to do it. But what she could do is get on the phone and call some colleges and ask them, what's possible. That there is a step you can take towards any dream you have. And if you take that step, the next step will appear.
Well, you're living proof of that. I mean, if 30 years ago someone had said, go out, get a congregation, get 3,000 people together, get yourself on 100 radio stations, you'd say, come on.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do this.
I don't know how to do that. I look around our campus today. There's 95 acres. We have an elementary school, a retreat center for 160 people. We serve 3,000 people a week, plus this radio program. And I go, I don't know how to do that, but I do know how to take these principles and these practices and practice them one day at a time as I lay them out in the book, and just take baby steps. A baby learns how to walk one step at a time, and he's not or she's not afraid of falling down. So I put a whole chapter in the book about how to deal with failure.
Two final questions. What do you feel about Christian, and if not Christian, at least religious affiliated education? the importance of it in society. I wouldn't trade 12 years, even though I hated the nuns at the time. I wouldn't trade those 12 years for anything.
No, in fact, my husband was raised in Catholic education as well. And I think without a spiritual basis, that a child is ill-equipped to live in life.
Mary Manin Morrissey is my special guest on this week's American Montage. She has quite a story to tell. Mary, you do it so well in your book here called Building Your Field of Dreams. Let me, for those who joined the program late, read this from the flyleaf of the book. It says, at 16, you were a homecoming princess who dreamed of college and a teaching career, but before the year was over, you found yourself expecting a baby. You hastily wed, but then you were treated as an outcast. You told us that terrible story about how you were sent to another school, literally, I guess, in the minds of kids to the other side of the tracks. Then within a year, you were diagnosed as being terminally ill with liver problems. You prayed away your problem. Today, you are the Reverend Mary Morrissey, the spiritual leader of the Living Enrichment Center in Wilsonville, Oregon. You have 3,000 people in your flock, and you are on 100. You are heard in 100 countries on radio. Quite an achievement. Mary, let's talk here finally about outreach. A lot of people hear this show, not a ton of people, but a lot of people. You're heard in 100 countries. What do you tell to that lonely person who's out there alone, particularly maybe a teenage girl who finds herself in the same straits you were in when you were 17, or a person diagnosed with a terminal illness, someone who maybe wants to take their own life? I mean, there are some pretty dire situations out there. What do you tell to that person who's considered an outcast as you were, or who is maybe at wit's end? I mean, how do you tell them things are going to get better?
I say to that child that there is hope. Hope is one of the best things of all. Don't lose hope. You just take one day at a time. And I think what you said earlier, is this the worst day of your life? If the answer is yes, it can only get better. And if you just don't know which way to go, then call your local crisis center and say, I'm going through something, I need some help, and you will get three different options. Pursue the options that you do have, and you will find a path.
Mary, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
After adversity, she dedicated her life to helping others. I'm Dennis Daly.